This is The Comms Exchange, a podcast by 3090 Marketing. Each episode, we sit down with colleagues, leaders, and changemakers to share stories and lessons from the field of community and economic development. Together, we explore how communications shapes strategy, builds trust, and drives momentum, because every project, every partnership, every breakthrough begins the same way, with a conversation. Welcome back to the Comms Exchange, where we explore the people and ideas shaping how we build, connect, and communicate. I'm Rachel Ledet.
Christianne Brunini. Today, we're in Jackson, Mississippi with someone who's been feeding and fighting for positive change in the City of Soul for more than 3 decades.
Jeff Good is with us. He is the president of Mangia, Bene Restaurant Management Group and the force behind Bravo, Broad Street Baking Company, Sal Mookie's, and a full catering arm. He's also a neighborhood investor and a community and workforce advocate.
Today, we're going to talk about restaurants as civic infrastructure, what it takes to keep showing up for a city in crisis, and why a restaurant job still matters for people and communities. Jeff, welcome to the Comms Exchange.
It is an honor to be here, ladies. Thank you for inviting me.
We're going to jump into our questions. Our first one being around hospitality and your beginnings. An interesting fact, you did not actually start off in hospitality. You were selling computers before you started pitching pasta. What was the moment you decided to open Bravo in Jackson, Mississippi, and where did it come from as far as a shift from let's run a good restaurant to restaurants are part of community catalysts?
That's a mouthful, pardon the restaurant pun. And pitching pasta, that's pretty alliterative. I'll have to keep that. When you say that my first job was not in the restaurant business, I might have to disclose that's not quite true, because through high school and college, I worked in the food service industry, which I think, everyone needs to do at some point in time. It is an extraordinary experience. Teaches a lot. Very quick bio. I moved to Jackson, Mississippi in 1980. Yes, that's how old I am. My senior year of high school from Salt Lake City, Utah. My dad was in higher education. He was vice president of student affairs, dean of students. He took a role with Millsaps College, which is a small private liberal arts school, Methodist affiliated here in Jackson. So I moved here, a stranger in a strange land, went to public high school here for my senior year, was really a fish out of water, was befriended by a guy who would turn out years later to be my business partner. And as I tell people oftentimes when we talk about origin stories or just growing up, you never know who you're going to meet and how that's going to, impact. Just like seeing Christianne today after, circles had intertwined for a while at the restaurants in Jackson. So I went to college. I worked my way through college waiting tables, and that was my first real intense slice of hospitality. But upon graduating from college, business degree, took a role with a large computer company and did a traditional job of selling computers. It was selling large systems. It was involved with door knocking and following up on things. So I learned a lot about organization. I learned a lot about rejection, because it was it was a larger sales cycle. It was a longer sales cycle. And we were not IBM, so therefore that we were always kind of a step behind. And so those skills kind of fit me well for what would end up happening when we received information from the company that they were going to be bought up by another company. And the new business plan for the year said that they were going to close the division I worked for because it had kind of run its life course. And they were also going to close the Jackson office. So Debbie and I, my wife, we weren't quite sure what we wanted to do. This had become home. Debbie's from Memphis. This was very comfortable for us. So I started looking for another career, and I couldn't quite find something in sales that I liked. So I called that guy from high school one night and just kind of complained about the circumstance I was in. Said, I'm trying to find a job, can't find one I like, or they don't like me for the ones I do like. Not quite sure what I'm going to do here. Got a mortgage. My wife's a school teacher. Don't know how this is all going to work, because eventually they're going to stop paying me. And so that phone call led to the rest of my future. At that point in time, we said, what if we went into business together? And what if we opened a restaurant? Because Dan was a chef. So let me get that point out. He was in California, had gone to culinary school out there and was working in a series of restaurants. And so he and I put together the idea for what would be our first restaurant, which was Bravo Italian Restaurant in Highland Village. And we lacked a couple things. We lacked a lot of experience. Again, I told you what my pedigree was, and he was chefing it up a little bit in San Francisco. He was actually not in the kitchen at the time, that we were talking about this. He had actually migrated to the front house in a restaurant that he was wanting to work in the kitchen, but they had a 2-man kitchen. He couldn't get in there, so he was in a holding pattern. And we didn't have any money. So that's kind of a difficult thing to pull off, but we put a business plan together, about 60 pages, met with a banker, as a friend of mine, told him all about this idea, how great it was going to be, the design and menu. And after listening to me over lunch, he said, well, we can loan you. I mean, I said, how do you borrow $500,000? Because we think that's what it may take. And he says, well, we can loan you $500,000 tomorrow if you have $500,000 in the bank. That classic situation that, the capitalist system, which is amazing because you can grow and do anything, but you got to have that first, foot on the ladder. And we did not have the ability to get that first foot. So we fell back, and I talked to some business people, did some networking, and learned how folks would put together partnerships, LLCs, limited partnerships, and sell shares of stock. You'd have general partner to be responsible for the business and have the autonomy of that. You'd have passive investors. So that plan went to 250 pages. I prospected 750 people, talking to them either face-to-face or on the phone. I fed 250 people in these little dinner parties that Debbie and I hosted at our house. We had a little 2-bedroom house in Bellhaven. Every Tuesday or Thursday, sometimes both Tuesday and Thursday, if we were lucky, we would have 6, 8, maybe 12 people show up, and we would do a little buffet, and we would talk about the business over a glass of wine, sit them down on the sofa over dessert and coffee, give them the business plan. Out of 250 people that came through our doors, 44 people invested $10,000 apiece. And April 7 of 1994, we opened the doors for Bravo. So in 5 minutes, that's the origin story.
That's amazing.
That grit, that's kind of that, I'm an outsider, was not from here, did not have any social capital, did not know anyone outside of the small, church group, friend group. And the work group I had I actually reported to people out of state. So it was really kind of a lone wolf work-wise. I was able to organize myself working along with my partner and make something magic happen. And from there, we opened a second restaurant 5 years later, and then opened another restaurant half a decade later. And here we are. So that's the origin story. You asked me a 3-part question, and I have already forgotten what the second and third part was, if you want me to be specific.
Well, it was kind of about shifting from the mindset of just having a good restaurant to how a restaurant can be a catalyst for community.
Well, you're assuming we have a good restaurant, so I appreciate that. That's good. I appreciate it. So yeah, I quickly skidded through the fact that we opened 2 more restaurants. We also tried a couple smaller restaurants in downtown Jackson. So to know Jackson, Mississippi is to love her and to oftentimes feel sad for her. Right? We are the capital city from Mississippi, so we're one of 50 state capitals, and yet we are a shrinking population. We have a pretty stagnant economic condition here. And it has been on this decline truly since we opened our doors in 94. We kind of, Jackson kind of hit the peak in the late 80s, early 90s in terms of population. The donutting, the building out of the suburbs has caused a great drop in care and consideration and capital. There's my alliteration for you. So to be in the hospitality business, a couple of things. We need something called butts and seats. Christianne will appreciate that term. We need people to come and sit down and eat and spend money. Restaurants are neighborhood things. You live in an area, you will trade primarily within that area for convenience, especially when it comes time for eating. You might grab, next to your office, you grab places to eat there. You at home, you're going to get takeout. You want to minimize the drive. DoorDash and the like kind of breaks down some of those boundaries, but still when we make choices to go somewhere, we're doing it based on convenience. Yes, we'll go to destinations. We'll meet people for something special. We'll do a business meeting somewhere. We'll do a special event. But convenience, we're going to use our neighborhood. So when the neighborhood is shrinking, that becomes a real problem for retail business. So it has certainly been a challenge. We've also had the challenge of infrastructure issues here. National news showed 4 or 5 years ago the rapid demise of our water system, and then the near month-long outage of water in some parts of our city as the pumping and the clarification systems completely failed. Fast forward to where we are now, everything works perfectly. There's been a tremendous amount of care and consideration and competence placed into that that work, but it was a sheer hell getting through it. And oh, and by the way, that happened right after COVID. So in the restaurant industry, we all closed down. We had to. That was the rule. You can't have places where people are grouping together and doing all that. So to go from, we want to open a restaurant to serve great food, like we were telling people around the, my dining room table, and then, in our little living room on sofas and pulled in chairs from the dining room. And we want to do great food. We want to do great service. We want to give an experience. Well, why in the world, especially if I've been in a community where things have been shrinking and getting more difficult, if I'm in the business of attracting customers and serving, wouldn't I go where those people are? Wouldn't I migrate as well? This city has been very, very good to me since moving here. The gift of this catapult of a career that I've had. It's place just means too much to me. It's also incredibly convenient. My entire world is it's a pretty tight square mile. And I'm able to come and go quickly and get where I need to go and do things I need to do. So selfishly, I love it. I love grit. So I like some of the grittiness of downtown. I like some of the challenges we have here. I truly believe that we're in a different cycle. We had a mayoral election, which was transformational this summer. I'm blessed to have been able to participate in that. And we have a process right now that's called Jackson Rising. If some of your listeners are curious about how a city takes itself from last to less than last, that's our goal. We have a building a strategic plan bottoms up from the community putting in 2 cents. So the reason is because it's the right thing to do. And the city needs people like me that are business owners that hire blue collar workers, 220 souls work in our businesses every day. Well, not every day, but in a rotating schedule, 220 people on the payroll. That's a lot. And especially folks that are getting their first job or their second chance. We serve a purpose, in terms of who we engage. And we feed people. That's a good thing. We keep people happy. How's that?
I think that beyond the larger neighborhood, and that let's talk a little bit more about that 1 square mile. And I want to jump to talking about how you've done something else that's interesting that our listeners would be interested in, which is that you also delved into a little bit of development and into infill. Took it an extra step to say, okay, my neighborhood is shifting. Yes. There are lots, there are houses that are in disrepair and to some degree blight.
Yes.
And you took that opportunity to reshape that into creating affordable housing that would also, to some degree, house your employees, right? And so how did you make that leap? Because it was an interesting plug-in that really helped that neighborhood at a time that it needed it. So what brought that around?
Well, again, we're crazy. So why would we do more work? The truth about financially, my story is I never had money. I don't know how, as we went through the first decade of our business, we were paying ourselves next to nothing because we just didn't have it. The goal was to pay back investors and to build the business. And as we got in that second decade, and I remember that month where we actually got a check that was larger. And then a couple months later, it was like, looks like something good is happening here. Debbie and I were able to pay down our consumer debt. All of a sudden we find ourselves where we have more money each month than we're spending, or, the ability to we're saving for the kids' college and we're doing this. And we had a conversation. We said, well, if we're going to do something and be able to save, why don't we do something active as opposed to passive? And so we made the decision to look into trying to, do a little infill work. And so I live in Fondren, which is a 1930s neighborhood in Jackson, Mississippi, with a commercial center, which is 1930s, 1940s shopping center, movie theater that was, has been reclaimed, et cetera, et cetera. And there were a lot of homes, oftentimes there's a corridor that will separate two economic realities in the same neighborhood. And so State Street is our defining place. And on the west side of State Street, there was a lot of houses that were in disrepair, state homes, things that were somebody died, it was just, being held. Things that just could use some help. And this was the early 2010s. We're able to organize ourselves and do one, two, three. Over time, we probably did a dozen and a half houses, sold some, kept most for ourselves for rental, and rented at market rate. So when we say affordable housing, we never got into any type of governmental programs or something like that, but we were always fair and always generous in terms of what we would do. And it's been lovely. And I think the catalyst there was, especially on Mays Street, East Mays, we did 3 houses on Mays. And it's funny, the people that helped us with foundations, married couple, they got excited about it. They bought 2 houses. Some other guys I knew found out about what we were doing. They bought a couple houses, and before you know it, we had, the entire 1.5 block area had gone from complete, dishevelment, with an occasional homeowner still holding on, to something that's pretty viable. Again, just, you're doing it for return on investment. In many ways, financially, it's made a lot of sense. It's been really hard work, and we manage it ourselves. There's been plenty of times that I pull the car up and grab the toolkit and go inside and change a flapper valve, but it's been good. It's been good, and it's been meaningful. So thanks for mentioning that. I appreciate that.
Well, you're certainly not new to pulling out the tool belt, because, as you mentioned, I have worked for you. And
it hasn't stopped yet. I can't find a person in a.
But there's
cook.
always.
I can't cook, but I can fix things.
There's always something broken. There's always, one disaster after another, whether or not it's internal or external. So what?
There's 6 invoices this morning for repairs, Christianne, 6. And, they range from $150 to $780. You wonder why pizza costs what it costs. Let me tell you.
Well, and your margins are razor thin. So What keeps you turning the light on every day with all
I love what I do. I love what I do. We delight people. You've seen it. The stories of people have just had wonderful experiences with us, something meaningful. The trust that they give us, and that can be something as simple as, I'm going to do catering. I trust you'll be here on time. It's going to be delicious and it's going to be fair. To, I trust that every time I come, I'm going to get a good meal, be served well, or the trust that I'm going to do something special with you, and I trust you're going to execute this. It's wonderful to keep that trust. And then when we don't, and we're human and we're going to make mistakes, I love the challenge, and I still answer all the complaints myself. I love authentically. And when somebody complains in public on a review site or something like that, I respond in public. And when somebody responds privately, I respond in like kind. But I'm very consistent, take responsibility for the problem, explain that we're all human. It's oftentimes a good diffusing thing. It's also true. I mean, we're human. We're going to make mistakes. I don't diminish this. I understand what you're saying, and I want to make it right. And I am relentless until I'm able to do something, because I can't give people back time or serenity. If we have failed them in their service or their product, I can't give them back that time, nor the loss of serenity, because remember, they complain, so they were not very serene. But what I can do is try to fix it going forward. So why do I mention that? Because it means a lot when it works. And there's been plenty of times where people were foaming, and then they become some of our best customers because they were heard, they were validated. I gave, a form of compensation. Sometimes it's money, sometimes it's a return visit, sometimes it's just my ear. That's all they wanted, was just the compensation of having somebody listen. And then proof factor is for them to return and have the experience they're supposed to have and say, you're right, that was an anomaly. Of course, I have had a couple of people who've had black clouds over their head. So their return visit was worse than their first. So at that point in time, I say, well, I don't know what the hell I'm doing, so I'm just trying my best, and I'm sorry. So there it is.
There's always a grump in every crowd, right?
Well, that may be true too.
We're going to talk a little bit about the future now, Jeff, and you have been hiring and retaining employees for a long time, and certainly things change over time. What feels fundamentally different about finding and keeping good hospitality work from maybe the beginning of your experience to maybe what you're seeing now? You kind of mentioned first jobs, come back to work jobs. There's a lot of dynamics and demographics in that. And if you were a speaker in a room full of high schoolers or their parents, how would you explain working in the restaurant industry for a new employee and maybe what that means or what they could expect? I also had a restaurant job in high school and think there's so many life lessons that are invaluable about being in any kind of service industry. So I would love to hear your feedback about that.
Super question, super questions, super line of questioning. So why don't we start with the fact that I've been doing this for 32 years, and I hired every single person who worked in the front house at Bravo when I managed Bravo day in and day out, and Dan hired everybody in the kitchen. So I've been interviewing people, for a long time. I've been working side by side with people for a long time. And, wouldn't it be interesting to do a Google search of every podcast ever put out there, or ChatGPT or Claude, and say, how many times has COVID come up in a podcast? That was certainly a defining moment, but we were well on our way to a change in young people at work. So over the past decade, and it is directly attributable to technology and phone addiction, we see and also to opportunity, that there are many, many jobs for a capable and talented person who is looking for a gig, which the restaurant industry has always been the gig, right? I want to be an actor, so I'm going to wait tables until my big break. Plus, I get the benefit of seeing people, and you never know, I might run into Martin Scorsese because I work in New York City. The idea of being able to do customer service for a cruise line or for AT&T in your pajamas from your house with a headset on, and you clock in and you do a few hours. The idea of selling something on Poshmark, you're just selling out your stuff. We can go dark on that and talk about selling other things online, but it is true that capable and organized people have other opportunities in this day and age, particularly based on technology, to do other things. So a lot of the folks that used to do us because it was a convenient way to do something, and when you left work and clocked out, you're done. There's never, the beauty of when I waited tables is when I walked out the back door with the wad of cash I didn't have a damn worry in the world about work until I had the next shift. So we see there's been a loss for some of the more engaged people in our industry. The next loss is it's a damn hard job, as Christianne said. And it are long hours. It hurts. There's a physicality to it. And especially in the kitchen, holy cannoli. I mean, you're burning yourself, you're cutting yourself, you're bumping into people. You're sweaty as all get out. It is, I think, if you were living in Iceland and working in a kitchen, you're probably really happy because you could be warm. But, if you're in New Orleans or here in Jackson, you don't want that. So, there's other jobs people can take. Now let's talk about the personality. Kids are more brittle right now. They're really brittle. Brittle, not brutal, brittle. There's a real inability to accept criticism, conflict, stress. There's a real either sinking in or lashing out that occurs, and we've seen both. And this happens with you interview folks, you hire them, you're hoping it's going to work well, and then you're road testing them. They're on their own now, they're doing the work, and then something happens. A guest triggers them, another employee triggers them, or something, and you have an act out. This isn't happening with people that have been with us for a while because we all know each other, but we see that oftentimes with new hires. And it's very frustrating because you want to help everyone become their best self, but you also have to have a safe and functional workplace. So that's hard. And particularly I've found that young women, particularly young women coming from more challenged socioeconomic backgrounds, have a particular need to not be disrespected. And the teenage behavior of boy-girl bullying and things like that could really, people forget we're at a job. Sometimes that we're at there's a playground mentality that goes on. So it's a very different situation. And then for young adults, in the 20s and the like, there's just a lot of anxiety. I was talking to a gentleman who's one of the officers of one of the HBCUs here in Mississippi. And he shared with me that if he takes the entire 4-year swath right now of kids in his programs, freshmen through seniors, he was estimating that 65 to 70% are on some form of pharmaceutical attention, or the Prozacs, the Xanax, the Adderalls, the beta blockers, something, that there's so much anxiety out there. And that really hit home with me because we were talking about this very thing. And I said, we see that play out at the workplace all the time. So it is hard. So what's the success for us? And perhaps this goes over to the construction industry and perhaps other industries. We got to meet people where they are. We have to understand what their backgrounds are, and we need to make good hiring. We should hire based on personality, not on what people say. We should figure out, I can teach somebody anything. I can't teach them to be kind. We talk about production, having experience cooking is a must. But for service, you can take somebody who's never waited tables before and get them up to speed in a few months. I think what's super important is structure in the workplace where there's a set of rules, and the rules are fair, and they're equally upheld. Christianne can tell you from her time in the business that it is emotionally draining to do this, and it is extremely frustrating when your coworkers, in other words, peer managers, will not do it. Christianne was an outstanding outlier within our industry. Imagine that. She was above and beyond what anyone would ever want. And unfortunately, the turkeys constantly drove her crazy because they weren't willing to perform at the level. And then ownership, if we're not aligned and demanding excellence and willing to suffer and do whatever it takes to bring that along, that becomes a demotivating factor too. And I think that's what a lot of service industries have, is you have this fatigue at the top level. You have just holding on the best I can at the middle level. And you have this new influx of folks that are coming without the culture of the company. They need to be taught the culture of the company, but they don't want to know the culture of the company. That wasn't why they came to work there. So it is a hot mess. And so you wonder why your soup is cold sometimes. Well, let me tell you, it could have been because somebody took the soup bowl out of the kitchen, went around the corner, stuck it on a counter, and watched TikTok for 10 minutes, then decided to take it out. That's a reality. So, we need to engage like never before with young people, and we need to show them the dignity of work. Last part, the world is crazy, and the stressors that happen at the macro level really do come into the workplace. There's just a lot of unknowns right now, and financially with what's happening with gas prices. I'm sure we're going to start seeing all sorts of plastics and everything start to increase in price. This has really played out, in people's anxiety levels. And so, we need to all be kind and aware of that. I don't know if I answered your question, but I tried.
Well, you did it in several ways. And you brought up construction, and that is a relevant point because you, at one point in your career, also started Refill Café, which is analogous to what a lot of construction companies do, where they build internal training programs to ensure that the opportunity will rise to them, that we can bring them along. We can demonstrate the path in a way that they can see it's not just pouring the tea, it is so much more than that. And if we can share that vision, then there's more opportunity down the line. So I know that Refill is not in the same position that it was intended, but it did serve a purpose and a place. And I'm curious about how that came about, if you see that opportunity coming back into play, especially with this generation that doesn't really have the same social skills because they have been more removed, they have been more phone-based. So how does that enter into the larger economic development story in building the next generation of employees?
Great question and great research to understand where Refill is. For your listeners, if you're speaking to people that are builders, and I mean that by community builders, not just physical builders, but this idea of infill. So the idea comes to us in the mid 2010s that the idea of trying to do some work around the food system in some form or fashion and trying to engage, figure out a way to engage farmers and da-da-da-da. But part of this is also education. And again, we're in a shrinking market. We have a census tracts that are incredibly challenged in terms of wealth and opportunity and very little retail business. So down by JSU, our Jackson State University, large HBCU in town, just from downtown, a half a mile from the state capitol, is some real blight. And there was a coffee shop that the ladies who started that coffee shop down there 10 years prior had actually sat in Broad Street at a booth with me, trying to give them some counsel on how they could configure their business and vendors to work with and things like that. Well, they had called me at the death of their business that they were having to shut it down. It didn't work out well. So here's this building, and it's in this deprived area for growth and opportunity. It's visible from the parkway that gets you into JSU. So we come up with the idea of let's open a real retail restaurant as a nonprofit and do workforce training and follow the Cafe Reconcile model in New Orleans or Cafe Starfish in Dallas and Liberty Kitchen, and do something that is along those lines. So we get a Kellogg grant, do the groundwork, we come up with a plan, we find funding, and we open in 2019, the fall of 2019, with great fanfare, a market-driven, in other words, high-end quality deli food that's affordable, being made by staff, but also through 18 to 24-year-olds that traditionally have not worked. They either were disenfranchised for work, they failed at work, they couldn't hold on to a job, whatever, barriers to entry. And the idea was to give them some skills and do it in a customer-facing environment so they could have some skills to move on to do whatever they want to do after this training session. COVID. So when we reopened after COVID, the team that were the social workers there said, we can't run a restaurant and do this together. We had 2 cohorts that went through the restaurant experience. So we reopened the program, and we just finished, I think, the 24th. I'm off the board now, so I'm losing track of time in terms of numbers, but I think 24 cohorts have gone through. But instead of having the restaurant experience for work, they're just placed in internships. So it's a 10-week program, classroom and experiential, to take 18 to 24-year-olds. This next level problem now. Not the ones I've been talking about, because the ones I was talking about, they got a job. They came, they interviewed, they got a job, they showed up, and whether they succeeded at the job or not, they did all these things. These young people are folks that have such severe barriers to success that they can't get that job. Oftentimes it is trauma. Oftentimes it is transportation and family dynamic, children or elderly folks to take care of, lack of IDs, things like that. So we're really doing a lot of social work and wraparound services there. But the point about this, speaking to your builders, the people that are interested in building community, the same concept is doing some rental property. Same concept is taking a restaurant that had burned out, Fondren, Sal Mookie's, the old Woodlands, caught fire. Let's renovate that and bring it back. Using your skills and your capital for the good of the community can be profitable, if that's what you're looking for, financially. It certainly can be profitable spiritually. And if the two of those can intersect, that's a sweet spot to be in. That's pretty good stuff. So I would just suggest that, looking in your hometown or an area that you're interested in helping with and doing something along those lines, there's always an opportunity to do something. So that's kind of the story about how Refill came along and what the idea was.
In community development, we talk a lot about placemaking. When I look at Appalo's at Renaissance and Sal Mookie's and the district, it's a real example of how restaurants can really combine together green space, sort of like a parks feeling, connections, and people stay and hang out, kids are playing, families linger, and it is so much more than just sitting to have a meal. For other operators and mixed-use developers that are trying to get it right and really have impact in their communities, what have you learned about how each of these pieces comes together to transform an area and provide sort of an experience more than just a dining location?
First off, if we're talking to developers, you need to co-locate multiple businesses of the same type. So, this is one of those times that working together works. At the district, we took over a restaurant we moved Sal Mookie's from Fonder into the district, a live, play, work, new development in Northeast Jackson off the interstate. We took over a restaurant that had already gone through 2 restaurant failures, which had everything to do with the folks that were operating those restaurants, not the locations, because we've been there for 5 years now. The other 2, I think, were a year each or something, year and a half. So the longevity factor is just that was indicative of operating, I believe. My point is, we've been there long enough that there's been a couple of restaurants that were contiguous to us, one directly across the green and one in a building that's removed from the green a little bit, but still, oriented towards that. And the green, just like you had mentioned, is a common area that oftentimes these live, play, work facilities will create something to create a town square, because it has apartments, office buildings, retail, and restaurants. So we've been by ourselves for the majority of the time we've been operating there. We've either been operating with no restaurant, we've been operating with a restaurant that was under renewal again, so construction. We've been working next to a restaurant that was not doing well and closed down. So this past few weeks, a new restaurant by Derek and Jennifer Emerson, 2 amazing operators here in town. They opened up, of which I'm lucky enough to have some work history with both of them through our organization, which was a blessing. They opened up a new concept called Masa Mesa, which is a Latino concept. And we have all just been covered up. The district has just been animated beyond belief. It's been overwhelming. Now the weather doesn't hurt. This is one, March, April is a damn fine time in Mississippi. So the idea of don't let a tenant get frustrated because you want to open another, you're a restaurant, you got a lease, and I'm paying all this CAM. You can't open another restaurant here because that's going to take away from my business. We have seen every single time in Highland Village, regardless, that a high tide rises all boats. There may be an adjustment period where some of your clientele are going to try the other restaurant, but it will always end up with more. Second part is you need to make sure that you've got the amenities. You need to have, there will be trash. There will be trash. You need to be able to have the facilities to be able to manage the common trash, because especially in spaces like that, people do a lot of to-go, and then it's thrown away. People will bring their own stuff, and that brings up the point about bringing coolers and setting up and things like that. You need security. You need to have some presence there, and you need to program the space. So it's helpful to have some music, to have some things. We've got a Masters thing coming up this next couple of weeks for the Masters tournament, where the big screen TV will come out and there'll be the ability to enjoy the matches and see what's going on. So the rounds. So I think that this idea of third spaces that are external to buildings are really kind of amazing. It goes back to the European idea of a plaza, a piazza. Other third spaces are internal. That's Banner Hall. So Christianne remembers what Banner Hall used to look like. And then we did a little remodel and it was okay. Now we've done a full remodel and it's really, really rich and very, very vibrant. And we've matched that with our restaurant with a little upgrade there. And so a third space at Broad Street is, I take my laptop, I show up there at 7:00, I do all my pre-work, I go off and make my sales calls. And as I'm walking out the door, I take a sandwich tray with me to go take to one of my clients. I don't have an office, so I come back in the afternoon, I get a cup of coffee or a soft drink or tea, and I hang out for a few hours and I knock out all my paperwork and emails. And then if I want to, I can grab a sandwich or something to take home, or I just leave. I don't get anything. I belong to a recovery group and I need a place to meet upstairs and have a cup of coffee. I need to spend some time with my church group and do a planning thing. I'm in the junior league and we need to do committee meetings, and we don't need a big room. We just need a table for 4, but we need to do it for 6 months in a row. We're going to meet every single so-and-so and we're going to meet there. The idea of a restaurant providing space, just like a coffee shop would, if you will, is unique. And I've had a lot of old grumpy men tell me before, you're letting those people sit there for free all day long, taking away your revenue. Christianne will be glad to know that we are in the process this year. We are well ahead of last year again, which is so freaky. Broad Street is about, geez, let's not get too far in the future. You said look into the future. Let's not look too far. We are on track to be 4th year in a row record sales, and it's significant. It's really significant. It's not just, oh, we beat it by $1. The machine is working well. And the machine works well because the guests are delighted in what we do and good people are doing it. And that's the magic of a business, when you can bring the internal resources to bear and coordinate to put out a product that intrigues and attracts the external customers. And that could be in the market segment you speak primarily to, ladies, for builders and developers. Build a product that people will love and do it with quality so it'll stand. Billy Neville, who opened the Rogue, which is a famous, and still is open under new ownership, famous men's clothing store, had a sign on the wall, and you've seen this before places. The satisfaction of cheap price dissipates when the poor quality of such, lives with forever. If you buy something cheap, you're going to be complaining about it forever. So, do good work and do it well and do it consistently. And people should show up. Even if you're in a market that may be declining, you can still carve out a niche.
That's great. Great answer. Okay, so we're going to jump into our speed round and ask you just a few quick questions. And first thing that comes to mind is the responses that we love to get from our guests on our show. So first question, name one item that you can never take off the menu because the regulars just will not let you.
Well, over at Bravo said damn lasagna, which, we never put on the menu. They put on there but bruschetta, the bruschetta, the polenta at Bravo, the chicken BLT sandwich at Broad Street, the tomato basil soup at any place when we make it. And then over at Sal, it's the chicken wings. I mean, who would have ever thought that we would we would corner the market on chicken wings?
Well, there are Jackson restaurants and chefs gaining more awards and national attention these days. Name one underrated operator that you think is really getting things right that should be getting more attention.
Godfrey Morgan. Godfrey's Caribbean Cafe. Godfrey worked with us years ago. He's a great dude. He's from Jamaica. He was an immigrant, went to JSU. He's had an amazing arc of his career, but he's got a restaurant that he opened up. It's his fourth move. He continues to build out. He's got an old Western sizzling that's located across from the outlet malls in Pearl, and he sells more oxtail than anybody else I know, but he makes some delicious food. He's just a really cool dude, and he's authentic and great. He's just fabulous. And if it's not that, it's the guys down at Aladdin. They crank out some delicious food mighty quick and cheap. Love it. It's my reg. I love it. They do breakfast now.
I put that on my list.
Yeah, they got some good omelets there. Put some of that halloumi cheese on there. That's good stuff.
Okay, last question. What is your favorite restaurant in another city of the world that is your hot spot to go if you're traveling?
How much do you love the Hi-Hat over off Ferret down in New Orleans? Do you love it? Love me some Hi-Hat. Great. There's also in New Orleans, there's a place I found, Beggar's Banquet, that's there right off of, it's past Melpomene on Britannia. And it's a delightful, delightful restaurant. And then there was, who the hell knows the name, but there was a restaurant in France. I had the best salad of my life in this place. It was in Provence. Got to get Debbie to take me back, but God knows if it's there. And then in Italy, we found there was a restaurant down a dark alley that everyone was freaking out because I was on the GPS walking, and I get blamed because I'm helping. Everybody's like, "Oh, we're hungry," and blah blah blah. High school kids, we're in a group thing, But I got them there. Place my wife told us we needed to go to, and it was an extraordinary find. It's the off-beaten things. Tyler Cohen, he wrote The Economist Gets Lunch, the book that came out maybe a decade and a half ago or something. And his premise was the best food comes from the most unremarkable and unexpected places. The best ethnic food comes from forgotten strip malls, because these are authentic people that are starting a business and they're grinding it away in that kitchen. And don't be afraid of the taco truck, and don't be afraid of trying something new. And I think that that's a great analogy for trying things in general in life. I remember my daughters used to, when they were kids, trying to give them sushi. They had no interest. Can't stop them now. Hell, they want to go to the expensive place. I'm like, what are you talking about? Going over there. Anyway, how'd I do? That was a short lightning round. Lightning can strike twice, maybe.
That was great. No, we are so appreciative of your time today, Jeff, your insights and your history in the Jackson area and in the restaurant business in general. Thank you for being there and giving us your grit story. I've never heard of anyone piecing together $10,000 at a time to start their first investment. So just showing that where there's a will, there's a way is such a powerful story. And we are just so appreciative of your time and attention today and cannot wait to reconnect with you and come see the expansions of your places when I'm in Jackson next time.
Come holla. And Christianne, when you venture over County Line Road, give me a call.
Yes, she will.
You bet. I'll do it soon for sure.
All right.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, ladies, very much.
Thanks for listening to The Comms Exchange, a podcast by 3090 Marketing. If you enjoyed today's conversation, please be sure to follow or subscribe so you don't miss out on an exciting new episode. We'll be back soon with more stories and strategies from the field, because every breakthrough begins with a conversation.